So hi everyone, we already have a big group joining, so we'll start this webinar. Thank you for joining us. This webinar will focus on practical ways to work with MatchTracker using eventing and positional data alongside video, which today we will use some examples of the Dutch Eredivisie. Although we'll be using the Dutch Eredivisie for data illustrations, the same approach can also be applied to using your own data from your own leagues and providers. So we're happy to show you that as well on the different call if you're interested in that as well. As a part of this series, this session will look how you can use your data sets to support your game plan creation while making it easier for your analysts and coaches to collaborate through your hub and focus systems. This session will be led by Steve Collins, who brings experience from both club and applied settings. He spent 4 years now at Catapult as a customer success manager, working with various clubs within Europe. And before that, he was working for 7 years at Arsenal as a video analyst. You will be able to add questions throughout the session by using the Q&A button, and we will take some time at the end to go through these questions with Steve. I'll hand it over to Steve now, who will lead this session. And as I mentioned, please add any questions and we will discuss that at the end.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, appreciate everybody who's in attendance. Like Mike said, today we'll focus on touching around opposition analysis and some processes and concepts that you guys can hopefully apply to some of your own work across the whole Catapult Pro video suite. So I'll touch on a couple of slides, but I'm really keen to get straight into the sort of demonstration and around the software itself. So just to set a bit of context, I will just sort of highlight that. Obviously, I know around the analyst role and the different workflows that the analyst is involved in on a daily basis. This can be wide ranging, and as an analyst, we're often involved in many different processes when it comes to preparing for games and reviewing performance and such like that. Today, we will focus more specifically on just a couple of these things. So definitely highlighting the processes around opposition analysis, and as well how we can start to utilize different data sources that we might have access to inform part of our process when it comes to reviewing opposition playing style and also formulating game plans for when we come up against these opponents. So this will be our main focus on today's webinar, but we will definitely follow up within the series with applications of the software and data across different workflows within the analyst process. And just to highlight kind of how we'll run through this today, and what it will kind of look like is we're looking at really highlighting some examples and concepts from an end-to-end sort of workflow perspective. So when we talk about that analysis process, it's about how we, start to refine down the information that we want to see, use these different data sources that we might have access to be able to do that. And a platform such as MatchTracker is a really nice starting point for us to add in, all of these different types of data that we have access to and sync them all together. So today we'll be touching on, the use of video, obviously, which underpins everything, that we do as analysts. But also some combinations of our own data that we might have access to internally within our organization, eventing data from multiple different providers that are supported within the platform, and combining this with positioning data to give us some really deep context into what we might expect from different parts of team structure and the way that we might look at the data from an opposition perspective. From there, the other sort of elements of the Pro Video Catapult Pro Video suite really come into action. So We can utilize the hub, which is our cloud-based sort of storage and distribution platform, and this can really help us automate the formulation of data and packages within Focus. So using that data to one, gain insight, but also use it to automate a lot of our process when it comes to creating and distributing that information to the rest of our organization. And then from there, again, leveraging the hub and the cloud-based sharing to really hit that endpoint within the process of an analyst and use it to refine down clips, create presentations, and use that as an endpoint to offload that information to the players within that process ultimately. So just with that, just wanted to highlight what that sort of the topic of today is and how we'll kind of move through that process with the different platforms and give you some relevant examples of how each of them can be applied to your sort of day-to-day workflow from opposition perspective. So I will jump into the software. And we can start to look at some relevant examples applied to, like Mike said at the start, some games from the Dutch Eredivisie from an opposition perspective. So today, what I want to focus on are just certain elements of that opposition analysis process. So obviously, when we review opponents, we want to break it down usually from a phase-based perspective, and obviously cover all of those relevant phases from in possession, transitional phases into out possession, to give us a well-rounded opinion and view of how the opposition will play. Today, I'm not going to go through every sort of phase and break it down, but I'm going to sort of pick out a few different phases where we can start to apply the data and use different features and concepts within MatchTracker. Firstly, to basically review those phases and give us some nice insight, which is going to facilitate our process of what we already do as analysts. So I'll start with goal kicks. Obviously, a key part, especially when we look at the start point of most in possession phases. That phase one build up or goal kick sort of build up phases, as teams might term it. Move into some more context around like open player build up. So then looking at that next phase of that sort of in possession sequence. And then also going on to touch on some transitional moments within the game and how we can start to leverage the data to give us some really nice insights from that perspective. One thing I'll add before I sort of get into the examples is the data set that we're using here is across 4 games. So 4 games of one particular team. Obviously, the way that MatchTracker operates and we can leverage that information in the platform is that we can handpick obviously as many games from an opposition that we want to use, and all of those games and that data will contribute to the insights that we then gain within the system. So the 4 games can be seen on the side here, and I'll flip between relevant examples from all of those games and show you how we can maybe start to integrate that into our opposition profile. So like I mentioned, we'll start with goal kicks. And one really nice starting point and way that we can start to build this data out is to give us that sort of top level overview and that before we start to dive deeper into the data. So this page here gives us a nice layout of the data and gives us a quick snapshot in terms of what we might expect from the way a team builds up from the goalkeeper. So both from a build-up phase, a long ball, a more direct phase, and then also, how many times within these sample matches that this team looks to break quickly and actually move the ball into the final third through the thirds with speed. So from an overview perspective, we can start to see that maybe the majority of the time this team is one that looks to build up rather than play direct. However, there are sort of significant examples of where they might do this. The distribution maps give us a really nice way of also breaking that down from a positional perspective. So not only from when they play direct, but also when they play short. We can start to then get a nice concept in terms of areas that they might look to exploit. And this gives us a really good starting point in terms of the data and how we might then dive into this a bit deeper and interrogate it so that we can start to uncover the trends that matter to us when we're identifying these tendencies. So you can see from a direct perspective, the particular tendency to maybe play on one side. And also similar from a short perspective. So when they do play short, you can see a lot of those first passes occurring sort of centrally, but then also maybe more of a tendency to play off that left side. So just as a way just to give us that overview, we've got that context, and when we can use that to then dive into the data a little bit further. The first way that we can do that is by actually breaking down the whole sequence. So rather than looking at just the goal kicks in isolation, we can actually then build on this further and actually start to look at, entire sequences which start with a goal kick and have certain elements within them. So what we have here is a table of data with a few filters applied. So we're interested in seeing sequences. In this case, we're interested in seeing sequences which start with goal kicks. And then we also have additional filters applied here to show, for example, the first pass distance. So we're saying here that we want to see all goal kick sequences where the first pass is a maximum of 20 meters. So, really honing in on those goal kicks that are played short initially. And we can then maybe start to look at those trends from a sequential perspective on the pitch map. So at this point, is it a case of when they do play short, do they look to play down one side more regularly? Or is it a case that they play short, go direct, for example? So from this data, there might be an indication that that the preference is to maybe play a little bit more down the left side than the right side. And this is again something that we can use as a basis for us to then dive into that information a little bit further. And the way that we might do that is by actually breaking down and looking for patterns of individual passes within the sequence. So one really nice way that we can do that is by using the pass sequence index. So this is a filter which allows us to show what number of pass this was within a particular sequence of play. Again, we're interested in seeing goal kick sequences. And from here, we might set some kind of filter to say, I'm interested in seeing the second up to the fourth pass within all of these goal kick sequences. And on top of that, we might say that, we're interested in just seeing that the ones which are occurring and starting within our own third. So, from here, we can infer that these are all the short goal kicks or the passes which have occurred within a short goal kick sequences from the second to the fourth pass. So giving us, a nice indication of what those tendencies are of the opponent and the patterns that we can start to infer from here. So interestingly here, we can start to break this down in terms of end position of those passes. And in this case, we're breaking it down into the third. So we can see a fairly even distribution in terms of those passes which are ending in the own third versus the middle and the final third. So 14 in these two, whereas 16 in these two. So a very even split in terms of when this team looks to maintain the ball in their own third and then maybe go more direct. So this gives us again a nice basis to say, what are those triggers? What is it within the sequence that maybe makes their decision to play direct and play long rather than maintain the ball in their own third? And there's one really nice sort of feature that we can use to hone in on that and look at that in more detail. And that's around sort of average positioning from these moments. So one really nice way that MatchTracker allows you to leverage, especially the positioning data, is the way that we can view the average position from certain moments within the game. In this case here, we can view the average positioning, the starting positioning from these goal kick sequences across multiple games. So by highlighting these instances within the table, and maybe sort of viewing this across different games, we can start to see when they play short, what are their positional tendencies, and is that contributing to anything in terms of the sequence and the way that this team wants to play. And what's interesting as we go through these games, and we look at this sort of average positioning from all of these goal kicks, is that there seems to be a tendency, especially against the opponents, that the team sort of maintains a man-to-man structure against the opponent's defensive shape. So maybe it's a way that they try and provoke this with the position of the 10. Definitely looking to have two sort of midfield players, the 8 and the 6, around the edge of the 6-yard box, to maybe vacate that space in the middle, but then also start to maybe create those man-to-man situations in the opponent's back line. And that's maybe something, a trend that we might recognize from the video when we watch through the games, but especially using the data to get us to that endpoint, and start to interrogate that information, with that automation sort of perspective. So if we jump back into, the sequential, the passes within the sequences, what we can then sort of break that down into, is the particular sort of end zone. So we can say, these are passes which are starting in the final third, but we're interested in seeing those ones which are maybe more direct within to the final third, or the attacking half. And by looking at this, using this data to narrow the video down, it gives us a really quick way of finding these moments on the video, and maybe seeing, what are those patterns. And what's really interesting here is all of these direct passes basically reflect that positional element where they look to play more direct when they're against a man-to-man structure in the back line. So you can see here more or less all of these examples here where they've played short and they've gone direct. Again, they're looking to maybe exploit that sort of man-to-man structure in the defensive line. And this is consistent across all of these games. So straight away, you can see how we've used a combination of the event data and the positioning data to maybe uncover those trends, and basically use that maybe as a starting point for how we want to elaborate and profile that opponent in the way that they might play. So yeah, these all give us really nice examples across these games, where that man-to-man structure is looking to be exploited from more direct play once the ball's played short from a goal kick. Additionally, we might sort of elaborate on that further and sort of sense check that. So instead of looking at the more direct passes within these phases, we might also be just interested in seeing those short passes. So the ones that have remained within the team's own third. And from here, it might be showing examples of why haven't they played direct? Why have they maintained it in their own third? And in these examples, we can see quite clearly that their defensive team has a +1 in the back line. So they've got an extra man, and maybe that's a deterrent in this case that this team doesn't want to play direct, and they're looking to maybe maintain or provoke that situation, and then play direct into that last line when they have sort of more man-to-man situations. So some really nice examples of that way that we can filter that data down, and use that to sort of sense check maybe our hypothesis in what we might be analyzing from the opponent and the way that they play. Again, here, maybe this one's more around the pass detail and the pressing action from the opponent. But again, you can see balls played short, but instead of playing direct, because the defensive team has a +1 in the back line, it's maybe then more a case of maintaining possession of the ball and looking to provoke that situation to then exploit later. So that's one good example of how we can use that data, different ways to filter that information and get really detailed with the way that we filter it and start to use it within our profiling of the opponent. So moving on to maybe more open play build up, and how we can start to apply some similar concepts, and some slightly different features and options within the system, to uncover even more insight into how teams might look to build up in open play. And one way we can do that again is by utilizing that positional element and those average positions, but this time based on entire phases. So what MatchTracker allows us to do with the positioning data is use this average position mode, but then also use different contextual factors for the way that we view these average positions. So in this case here, we have this sort of filtered for average positions during build-up moments. But then we can also start to dive into some different options to show maybe how positioning changes during the game, and also changes when the ball is located in different areas of the pitch. So some really nice examples here allow us to show, okay, on average, when the ball is in open play build up, so not from goal kicks, but more stable build up phases. What is this team's average position? And it also gives us that reference of the opponent's position as well. So not only are we assessing, how this team builds up, but we can also then see how they might change that based on the way that the opponent presses, for example, and the way the opponent sets up. So this might be, a really nice way of us identifying one, the games that we want to specifically hone in on. So, where it's a game of an opponent where they might press in the same way that we do for our team, then this might be a particular game that we look to focus on more in depth because it's more relevant to the way that we want to play against this team. So you can start to see here again as we change between the games, how the positioning of the build-up of the in possession team is in such a way versus the opponent structure. So you can see here in this game, I think it's AZ against Utrecht. We can see that in this case they are the opponent team. So Utrecht in this case have a +1 in the back line, so they have a spare man in the defensive line, which means that probably one of the spare players within AZ is one of the defenders in that build-up structure. As opposed to, for example, in this game, definitely set up maybe more against sort of a man-to-man press. So you can see here, there's almost a direct matchup on the average positions for that entire game in terms of the way that they look to build up against that structure. So again, that's really useful information for us to directly access within MatchTracker and use as a way of filtering out, this might be a game that I want to focus on more in particular, versus one where, it might not be relevant to the way that we want to play against that team. And what's also really interesting is the way that we can compare. So this is average positioning based on the current formation of the team. Whereas these two charts here allow us to filter this information down and view this for different moments of the game. So in this case, it's first half average positioning against second half. And again, this is a really easy and quick way for us to identify changes within the game, and maybe for us to focus really directly on why they might have changed that sort of build-up shape. So you can see here from this game, I believe it's against PSV. You can see the average shape during build-up in the first half was with one of the the central centre half playing higher up and more as like a pivot in midfield, as opposed to the second half where you can see that player has actually dropped more centrally and they're building up with a 3 instead of a 2. So again, that this might be something I'm sure that we would identify when looking through the video of this game, but using the data to point us in that direction, and maybe save time or introduce insights to us that we might not have recognized, is a great way for us to sort of start and leverage that information to make our processes more efficient. what MatchTracker then allows us to do is obviously find the video for those moments as well. So through the different display types, in this case, we're sort of leveraging that phases display. We can just find all of those phases really quickly in terms of every time they've built up. And it might be, that we find, so in this case, we're looking at all of those build-up phases from that game against PSV. And in this case here, we have this chart view to show the distribution percentage of how many times this team progress the ball and build up in the different 15-minute segments of the game. So what's really interesting is you can see, during that first half, only a very small percentage of those build-up phases resulted in ball progression, as opposed to you can see a lot more success in that sort of progressive play as the team changed in the second half. This then may well correlate with this change of shape, and this is something that we can then dive into a lot deeper with the video and the way that we can filter that data. This player here, this might be one of interest that we want to see and identify phases of build-up where this player was involved. And this is something that we can do really easily within here as well. So if I filter at the moment, I have all of these build-up phases within this game. But you can see here that we have this filter option to say, show me all of these build-up phases which include a certain player, which I can then do. And you can start to see then that the quick way of accessing that video. So finding really good examples of, what might have changed when that player is involved in build up from the shape in the first half versus the shape in the second half. What's more is you've then got that breakdown, that further breakdown of that sort of progression success percentage from the data as well. So again, you can see from those 15-minute periods from the first half, again, very low. Whereas when that player is involved in that deeper position, which we identified from the tracking data, there's a lot more success in that progression. And that might be, due to multiple factors, which we can then dive into and see further in the video. So, just by interrogating this information in the video, it gives us a way to find those moments. Here, is a good example of that shape where that centre back is higher and playing in that position. And what is it within these sort of moments that has allowed the team to be more successful in build up versus a little bit less successful. So you can see here, for example, this might be a good way of showing how they're a little bit more congested in central areas and they allow the opponent to press with a 2 when he's playing higher. And that might be a way of preventing successful progression through central areas, especially. Whereas, for example, if we find other examples in the data really quickly where that player is in a lower position as he is here, we can clearly see how that central area is a lot more vacated, and that perhaps creates space for other players, and also provokes the opponents to press with a front 3 rather than a front 2. So, this is, again, as analysts, this is what we recognize. This is the skill of the analyst, is to see these details when we watch the video. But this is just some really nice examples of where the data can maybe help facilitate that process, make us more efficient, and also give us those sort of contextual, objective insights that we can then put alongside the video to really back up our point and strengthen, our position on how we might see teams play. Furthermore, so staying within the sort of topic of build up, one really nice way that we can start to use the data again is by using some of the different filter options that we have around passing. So, we've kind of looked a lot at, from up to this point from a structural perspective, especially looking around sort of shapes within certain phases and how that might influence the way that the opponent plays. In this case here, we're kind of breaking this more down onto an individual player level, and starting to use the data to maybe identify, strengths and particular players which might be standout within this particular phase of build-up. And one way that we can do that is by focusing in on line breaks. So, from a team who looks to build up a lot from the back and progress the ball through the thirds, obviously having the capacity of your players in your back line to sort of play those more dangerous and progressive line breaking passes is the ideal. So one option that we have within the filter options is to look at line breaks and filter specifically for those types of passes. This then allows us to, chart for this information, and on this case, we're charting on an individual player level to show, what are the frequencies of which players do this the most, and what are the tendencies of the team in this case. What's interesting here is a massive standout in terms of the player. Again, this is from these 4 games as a sample, but it shows a clear standout from an individual perspective of which player maybe has that capacity to play those passes more frequently and with the most success. So straight away, we've got that way of identifying that individual player. But then also, seeing that from a positional perspective, whereabouts is it that that player is playing those passes from, and where is that player playing those passes to? So, for example, if we then filter it down for this particular individual who looks to play those most frequently, we get that breakdown of that positional element. And this paints a really nice picture. So we can see, a lot of these passes are from outside to in, and maybe looking to, play it within that specific channel with sort of a deliberate action following it. And obviously from there, this is a really easy way for us to look at that video and start to uncover those trends. So you can see here, this is the left side centre back who's playing these passes most frequently. And this just gives us a really direct way of finding the video around this particular trend, and then finding, is there any patterns when we watch the video, how we can start to see that information. And what's really interesting is actually there seems to be some consistencies with the way that this is structured. So, a lot of these passes are direct into those more central channels from outside to in, like we mentioned. Usually followed by a set pass to then play forward. So, again, it's just a way that we can find this information really quickly. And this might be information that, really decides how we look to play against this team. Is it a case now that we've identified that, this is the key threat in build-up, and we maybe start to restructure our sort of pressing structure to maybe keep the ball away from this player and force the ball on the other side, for example. So, these are things which, again, I'll kind of keep banging this drum because as analysts, I'm sure we identify this information, but it just gives us a really nice way to find that information and back it up with, specific visuals and an easy way to link that to the video all the time. Furthermore, so just to sort of wrap this up around the sort of concept of build up, we can maybe start to look at how other players perform in these situations. And one nice way that we can maybe start to get a good perception of the capabilities of players is to view their passes during these build-up phases, but under pressure constraints. So again, by using the sort of tracking data, and this gives us the ability to filter information around pass pressure. And what we have done here is the filter set for this particular table. If I open up the filter options here, you can see that we are just filtering for passes which are under medium and high pressure within these build-up phases. And this again gives us a really nice way of seeing pass completion of individual players under those pressure constraints. So again, we can identify that player that we spoke about previously, that left-sided centre back. actually has one of the highest pass completions from these four games, from this data sample, for passes under pressure during build-up. So again, that might be an indication for us to say, look, this is maybe something which we want to try and avoid as much as possible. And it might be, something that we then start to implement within our training in the build up to this game to try and prevent passes and play down that side for this team. Furthermore, we can then start to compare, other players. So in terms of maybe identifying what the right centre back is like under pressure, and starting to identify, is this maybe something which we want to start to implement within our game plan and the way that we play against this team. So again, just a few nice examples of how we can apply that data, the different filter combinations that allow us to see that information, and then sort of move into how that can be identifying the best video examples for our meetings, and then use that to work towards our sort of game plan formulation and how we set up against that team. So then moving into kind of the last sort of tactical topic, if you like, that I just want to sort of touch on, and give some ideas on how we can start to use in MatchTracker, is sort of attacking transitions. So again, like we've kind of touched on previously, we have this ability to use the data to filter for specific sequences of play. And this allows us to do multiple different things. It allows us to define, how that sequence starts, but also how, certain elements of that sequence are included, and how we then view that information. So in this case here, we're viewing those sort of transitional sequences, so those sort of counter-attacking sequences. And we can find those really easily in the data, by defining what the start type of specific these sequences are. So, anything around a regain in possession, a ball recovery, an interception, a tackle, would obviously then trigger that sort of sequence type. But we can then also start to apply additional layers of filtering on top of this to make it more specific. So in this case here, we have a filter applied for the sequence length. So, rather than viewing sequences where it's started with a ball recovery, but then it's not led to a particular entry into the final third, for example, or it's led to maybe a more sustained ball possession. We can refine that down and say, this sequence length, these sequences have to be a maximum of 15 seconds in this case. Obviously, this is an arbitrary value, and you can filter it how you want. But this is kind of an example of how we would maybe find, these attacking transitions, which are maybe more focused on direct play and attacking the, certain areas of the pitch once that ball's been recovered. Finally, we can also say that it has to include a certain element. So in this case here, we're saying, it has to include a final third entry. So it gives us that time frame by which, after the ball's been recovered in different areas of the pitch, the team has to have at least entered the final third, for us to then see that in our filtered list of data. So straight away, this gives us a really quick reference to them to look at those on the video. But again, we can start to uncover some trends within the data, for us to then maybe uncover some patterns of how we might expect that team to play. So again, we might say, we might see that it's a case of there's not many, so they maybe in their own third, so maybe they're not a team who looks to counter from deep areas. However, maybe it's more from higher up, or especially in the middle third here, we can start to see that that's quite frequent. This might be something that we then correlate with, for example, their pressing shape. So very similar to like we saw previously around, that average shape in build up. We can do the same for out of possession, and we can start to see, for example, how compact they are in sort of mid block phases, and that might be a nice trajectory for them to then counter on. So, it's putting all those pieces together to create that narrative and really start to discover, what it is that we're looking at, and focusing on from that particular team. And the final sort of concept that I want to sort of run you by here is around that ability to add in your own custom data and cross-reference that with the eventing data. Um, and in this case here, I'll kind of give you an example of how that looks. So many teams internally, either through your own manual tagging when you're watching games, or even through data science teams that you might have access to internally, often have this reference of your own phases and your own sort of styles of play. This information can be imported into MatchTracker and used as a reference alongside the event data and the tracking data to really give you some deep insights around your own phase definitions. And we have an example of this in the data here. So you'll see here you have this ability to add this imported tags column in. And this gives us the ability to then filter on that column. So in this instance here, we've actually utilized a passing table. We've filtered that down to show just balls in behind. And then we've filtered it even further to show balls in behind that occur during attacking transitions. So it gives us that way of referencing the data that we already have access to, but cross-referencing what events might be occurring during those times. And again, this is maybe something which allows us to uncover a really sort of deep insight and trends that we can start to see with automation through this data. One trend, which really interestingly that we can see here is around, again, which players play those balls in behind most frequently during those transitional periods, but also around who's receiving them most frequently, as well as the positions. So again, this player is getting a lot of good praise through the data, but you can see there's a particular tendency for this individual to play the ball in behind during those transitional moments. And like we have done previously, it just gives us a really quick way to reference the video directly from that chart. So what's interesting here is, through watching this, we can see that a lot of these are, very early and intentional passes in behind based on those transitional moments. So you can see here, sort of straight after regains, looking to hit that space in behind from that individual, and again into individual areas with particular relationships to different to specific players within the team. So, you can see this is very, very intentional. There's no it's not necessarily a case of looking to maintain the ball in these moments. It's retain the ball and then maybe within one or two passes, looking to hit that space in behind for certain individuals. So again, something that we might identify and we might use this as a quick way to reference and put this information into presentations for us to present back to our coaches and players. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that principle of cross-referencing your own data and using that alongside the third-party information data that you might have to create some rich context and find trends that might be interesting for our opposition profiling. So with that, that kind of wraps up that sort of element of MatchTracker and how the data is used to visualize this information in these different sort of display types, but then also use it as a quick reference to then find us the relevant video. Now, obviously, as analysts, we might be very capable and used to using tools such as this. However, we want really easy ways for us to get this information into the coach's hands as well, in a way that they can easily digest and relate to. So usually is not the case that the coach would use MatchTracker that frequently. And we might want a way to, get this information to the coach in a different way. So one really nice way that we can leverage this data is to create automated packages within Focus through the means of customizing XML files. So through all of this information that we have access to, everything that we've kind of touched on so far in these different pages, but also, everything else that we might be interested in terms of defensive transitions, high press, set pieces, out of possession phases, this can all be collated in an XML format that MatchTracker can then directly input into Focus. And there's some really nice ways that we can do that. And I'll kind of give you an example of how easy that is to then distribute to your coaching staff as well. So we have this feature within MatchTracker, which allows us to create a focus session via the hub, but leveraging this sort of customized XML. So this option here allows you to configure, first off, what the name of this package is going to be when it's uploaded. So you've got these sort of preset options in this list here. It allows you to choose your specifically formatted template. Again, I won't go into the details of how we create these XML templates on this webinar, but it may be something that we follow up with on a later version. And then what's really powerful at this point is you can choose to share this package with anybody within your organization, whether that's individuals or groups of individuals, which you can create directly in the hub. So we could say, at this point of creation, I want to automate the package and the data that goes into the timeline, but then also give the access to my coaches and give them specific permissions to be able to then view that information. So on upload, if I upload this directly to the hub, this is going to create me a focus package using that customized XML and allow me to view that within the system. So you see here, this has created me that hub package, and this then has automated my XML and allowed me to then share that directly with my coach at the same time. So in terms of course, we have all the same capabilities of being able to create your own tags and watch the game through and add your own information to the timeline. But as a way of creating that customized XML, based on all of that data that we've seen within the platform already. It's just a way that we can automate some of our process and also collaborate with our coaches at the same time. At this point, it's probably a really good time to sort of mention around those collaborative elements of what a hub session allows us to do. So you'll see that the actual session type, once we get this into focus from MatchTracker, is a hub session. And essentially what that means is the session is living in the cloud. And this gives us some really powerful collaboration capabilities once the session is in the cloud. So in this example here, I'm the analyst, I've got access to this session, but so have all of my coaches. This basically means that we can all work off the same session together without having to wait for anybody to manually update anybody else's session with any changes. So for example, my coach can be tagging his own tags on the timeline, creating his different rows. And I will be able to see that update in real time because we are all using the same cloud-based session. And vice versa, right? Anything that I then add supplementary to this timeline, all my coaches are going to see in real time. So it removes that element of manual file transfer and updating. Once it's been distributed initially, it allows us to then start to work efficiently on the same package without having to wait for anybody to update it, which is obviously usually the analyst's job to find any updates and manually update XMLs, for example. So that's one really nice, powerful way that we can leverage that data, automate timelines in focus and package creation, and distribute that to the rest of our sort of working team at the same time. And then finally, I kind of want to touch on, just to finish, around the way that we can wrap this sort of process up and use it to create presentations. So both in MatchTracker itself, and focus, we have this ability to create presentations. So, whether it's as we're querying this data in MatchTracker, and maybe there's, specific instances that I've identified which are going to be useful, I can add them into a presentation within this platform. But likewise, we can also start to do the same within Focus. So clicking on any combination of tags allows us to send this to a presentation which is integrated within to the platform. And from there, this is a really nice place that we can start to create that final meeting content and work on it together as an analyst or coaching team. So very similar to the way that we can do on the timeline and focus with our hub session. We can also create hub presentations. So, I can create a hub presentation, upload it to the hub, share it with my coaches, and we can all work on that same presentation without having to manually transfer any updates once somebody's changed clips or added new clips or removed anything. So one, it still allows us to collaborate really efficiently, but two, it allows us to create some really nice insights and final meeting content within the system directly. So not having to go external. Um, One nice way we can do that is through tactics boards. So we have this ability to, add tactics boards and show particular animations of, whether it's lineups or particular playthroughs of phases. We can start to animate that really easily within the system, which otherwise, some teams or some users might be doing externally at the moment. This just gives us a way to sort of directly integrate that within our presentation in the software. And then, of course, on top of that, we have all of the capabilities around the telestrations. So, when we come to creating that final meeting content and we want to make it as engaging as we can for the players and the coaches, we have that option with a lot of flexibility now to start to do this within the system. So highlighting particular tactical trends that we've identified and using the different capabilities of the software to add those telestrations in. It just gives us a nice way to sort of round that off and give us a polished sort of end product of what we can then present back based on the insights that, one, we've either manually uncovered ourselves, or two, things that we've directly accessed from the data within MatchTracker to give us that sort of insight of what we can expect from the opponent. So from there, I'll kind of wrap it up. Hopefully that's given you a really nice sort of insight into this sort of end-to-end process of using data to inform some of that process from an opposition perspective, and then using that to create those really efficient insights and from there start to share that with different users in our organization to ultimately sort of create our final sort of meeting content. At this point, I guess we will maybe answer some questions. Mike.
Yes, thank you so much, Steve. It's really, really insightful. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Um, does MatchTracker feature direct data integration for the respective sources, video event tracking, or is the manual import required for these data sets?
Yeah. So one nice thing about MatchTracker is we have support for a lot of different APIs directly within the system. So depending on what your access is from an event provider perspective, if you have tracking data, obviously you don't have to use tracking data if you don't have access to it. These can be connected to directly in MatchTracker via the API. And that just allows us to download the raw files that we need to create the matches within the system rather than us having to go external in some cases to find those. So as long as it's a provider which we have support for, which is wide ranging, we try and open it up to as many providers as we can. Then you'll be able to utilize that feature and download it directly within the system.
Perfect. Um, Another question. In addition to MatchTracker's filtering capabilities, can I build my own bespoke KPIs within the software?
Yes, good. It's a really good question. We have the ability to do this via a feature that I didn't touch on today, but it's known as custom alerts. So essentially, we have the ability to query whatever data sources we have access to. So whether it's event data, whether it's event data plus positioning data, to create bespoke metrics that we can then use to automate the identification in MatchTracker. So, whether that's counting numbers of players in certain areas of the pitch during certain phases, or creating our own definitions of what build-up might look like, or tactical concepts that are specific to our playing style. We can use the different combinations of the custom alerts feature to create those with automation. And that obviously also allows us to access and send those directly into our focus packages for use of our coaches. So they can get direct access to some of these custom bespoke metrics that we create within the system as well.
Cool. Short question. Can I use MatchTracker live?
Yeah, yeah, it's another good question. Match Tracker, as long as you have access to your data providers in a live context, you will be able to connect to the data live and use it for all of these processes that we've spoken about today. So, whether it's maybe having a more condensed workbook just to focus on certain areas of live performance, that data will just get delivered as and when the event provider or the tracking provider are delivering that information, and you'll see that basically populate in Match Tracker during a live game. So that can also be used a very frequent use case is to automate a lot of your live tagging. So creating a custom XML which is produced live off the live data. That can then populate your focus timeline, for example, and automate a lot of your live sort of tagging processes that you're maybe manually doing currently at the moment.
Perfect. And one last question regarding the collaborative workflow. You mentioned the creation of presentations. Is this a standalone module within the software or is it integrated in MatchTracker?
Yeah, presentations is actually integrated across all three of our Pro Video products. So whether you're only using MatchTracker, you can create a presentation directly in MatchTracker in exactly the same way as you can in Focus. And it doesn't have any lack of functionality. So all of the telestration capabilities, all of the pitch calibration, the automatic player tracking, that's all available in MatchTracker Focus and Hub. So we also have a Hub application, which is used for sharing to players, for example. The presentation functionality is also available in the Hub application as well as Focus and MatchTracker in exactly the same way. So depending on which product you're working in, you get the full presentation capability integrated within the platform.
Cool. There's a last minute question, Steve. How many matches do you use to analyze? Is there a minimal for matches, and what matches do you pick? An example, do you pick teams that play the same as your team, or do you pick weak teams and strong teams? Also, do you analyze previous season matches against the same team?
Yeah, so in terms of the number of games that you maybe use in Match Tracker, I guess that's it's usually your preference of the analyst and the way that they kind of conduct their processes. I'd say to get a meaningful sample of data, at least four, maybe up to six or seven, 8 games, it gives you a really nice sample size for you to get some meaningful insights from. That's not to say you can't use more. Some teams might use surplus of, 20, 30 games maybe to maybe review their own performance across the course of a period of the season. So Depending on, what your process is and what you want to get out of it, then you can use more or you can use less games. In terms of identifying which games to use, again, very much down to the skill of the analyst and also, the knowledge that we have as analysts or playing against teams previously. So it may be a case that you have sample of data and within one of those games there was a red card after 20 minutes. That game's probably not useful for the data. Maybe we remove that one. Again, kind of like I mentioned with some of the examples around the shape, the more relevant ones are maybe around picking teams when they played against an opponent who play very similar to us and might demonstrate very similar pressing structures to us or similar build-up structures to us. Those might be the interesting ones that we focus on to give us the most comparable versions of how we might play and what we might then expect from that opponent and the way that they operate. So yeah, the limit of games is dependent on the workflow, and I think the sampling of games is usually down to kind of how you identify what's important for your process and the way that you analyze the team. So
Perfect. So that were all the questions, Steve. Thank you so much. And as well to the participants, like obviously this was a specific example with the integration for the Dutch Eredivisie. If you're interested to see how it works for your competition with your data provider, we're obviously happy to showcase that to you as well. So reach out to Steve or myself, and we can obviously set up a meeting to go through that. And yeah, thank you for joining and have a nice evening.
thanks, guys.
Bye bye.